Some people claim that the ordeal with China started when the British first tasted Chinese tea. They fell in love with the flavor and the warmth that seemed to brighten their days in the regularly gloomy climate. It became an important dietary staple, with citizens spending an average of 5% of their household budgets on tea. Americans were not far behind in matching their fanaticism for tea, and so a strong market developed for this Chinese product, along with a robust demand for other luxuries such as silk, porcelain, and furniture. In return, America was able to sell furs, sandalwood, and ginseng. However, demand for Chinese products outpaced China's consumption of American exports. The British experienced a similar dilemma, having an increasing desire for these luxury imports, while China did not share such preference for European goods. Britain attempted to abate the trade deficit by selling cotton grown in its colony India, but eventually China increased its own cultivation and became self-sufficient in that regard. To the chagrin of foreign countries, they only accepted silver to settle trade deficits. In fact, about 40% of the world's silver in circulation found its way to China. China was a sort of mystery. It was, in fact, the most populous, advanced civilization at the time with a strong economy, despite its relative seclusion, to the perplexity of the Europeans. China did not engage in extensive expansionism or colonization, and did not even desire to develop labor-saving technologies, being content with its own large population for labor, and living in a vast and varied geography, free of trade barriers, so that the Chinese were capable of satisfying their own needs with each other's cooperation. This became possible due to political unity. Ancient China had always been ruled by Chinese culture, even when borders were fragmented in its earlier existence, allowing the whole population to remain united by culture and ideologies. Eventually, they came to be managed directly by a strong central government, in contrast to European states, where various populations were managed by feudal lords. While European states constantly engaged in war with each other, China refrained from engaging in international conflicts. Their relative lack of serious fighting experience and passivity to continuously improving military technology, however, would perhaps prove to be detrimental. For the British, the state of trading affairs with China became increasingly difficult to stomach. Brits wanted an increasing supply of their goods, but did not feel comfortable about the decreasing supply of silver in their treasury, being unfortunately unable to procure enough silver on their own to replace expenditures. Additionally, the manner of trade felt disturbingly restrictive as well. And the Chinese were not apologetic in that regard. When British envoys had come to establish diplomatic relations, they found the local custom of bowing before the emperor and offering gifts before commencing talks to be laughably absurd, and summarily declined to do so. The Chinese were shocked. They could not believe that such a level of disrespect could exist. Concluding that the British may not be trustworthy people, the Chinese did not enter into full diplomatic relations. Eventually, China created the Canton trading system in 1757. Only one Chinese port was open to Western ships, at Canton. Foreign traders could only engage with specially licensed Chinese merchants, preventing traders from traveling inland, as well as interacting directly with Chinese citizens or government members. China had decided it prudent to pass the Prevention of Barbarian Ordinances. This extreme introversion was interpreted by the British as being extremely unhealthy for the world's free trade, and more simply said, plain rude. This difficult situation needed remedying. To fix the presently most vexing issue, that Britain imported 3 times more than it exported, Brits searched for some goods that simply could not be refused. They found the magic material to be opium. While illegal to import into China, it was not unknown to the Chinese, it having been used medicinally to ease pain, assist sleep, and reduce stress. It was highly valued, and inquiring expeditions found that strong demand for it was quite possible. The challenge lay in avoiding Chinese officials with stealth and secrecy, and creating routes to smuggle the material into southern China. The British East India Company sent private ships, which anchored off Canton's coast, and then connected with Chinese smugglers, who earned substantial sums of money. The network of Chinese middlemen eventually included corrupt officials, who allowed opium merchants to establish monopolies over trade routes and territories. Opium armies assembled and grew to protect the cartel business. The British East India Company set to work heavily investing in and busily cultivating poppies in India. Americans also entered the market, but with inferior and cheaper Turkish opium, which unfortunately somewhat lowered the price British merchants could demand, making the material cheaper and more plentiful in China. The Chinese were particularly addicted to this substance. For the first time, silver began to flow out of China in great quantities. To spread awareness of its availability, smugglers dispensed free samples throughout the country. In some coastal areas, 90% of the population regularly used opium. Millions became addicted. Somewhere around 10% of the whole population came to rely upon it. If one interrupted consumption, they suffered chills, nausea, cramps, and could even die from withdrawal. Users became listless and incapable workers. Members of the emperor's own army and government began smoking opium. The government was horrified at the disgrace. It outlawed smoking and offenders received 100 beatings. And yet, opium use increased. In 1836, the government set about aggressively searching the country and closing opium dens, while dealers were executed. The emperor then called for a debate concerning the epidemic. In attendance were people of various opinions on the matter, with one side arguing that the time had come to legalize opium, and that taxes on it would help reduce the country's revenue shortfalls. Another side was adamant that opium was simply evil. An evil that had to be completely eradicated from all the empire. This became the official position. Lin Zexu led the cleanup campaign. In 1839, he wrote a letter addressed to Queen Victoria, questioning how she could support the flooding of the country with this evil. Was it not simple to understand that it was morally wrong? The truth is that once the British and American public learned of the opium trade, portions developed serious qualms about the situation. However, opium was Britain's single most profitable commodity trade of the 19th century. It was, honestly, not economical to kill off such a steady, sure stream of silver that was finally filling up the treasury. Lin Zexu took his job very seriously. He arrested over 1,600 Chinese dealers and destroyed thousands of pipes. He then came for the merchants, demanding that they turn over their stores of opium in exchange for tea. The British merchants refused, so Lin stopped all foreign trade and quarantined the port, with the foreign merchants confined inside. After 6 weeks, the merchants caved and turned over 26 million pounds of opium, which 500 Chinese were required to destroy by mixing it with lime and salt before dumping it into the bay. This was a line that China should not have crossed. The British became fully enraged. They claimed that the Chinese had no right to touch private property, especially on international waters, as they saw it. This was what began the First Opium War, from 1839 to 42. British warships came to destroy a Chinese naval blockade before proceeding to Canton, which they attacked and occupied, before going on to capture Nanking. Chinese armies were easily defeated, with only 69 British soldiers killed, and their overall casualties amounting to 520 soldiers, while the Chinese sustained between 18,000 to 20,000 casualties. When Chinese commanders realized that the war was well-nigh lost, they committed suicide. China became required to pay Britain a large indemnity, cede the island Hong Kong, and add 4 additional treaty ports from which the British could trade and reside in. Additionally, British citizens were granted extraterritoriality, the right to be tried by British courts, and not by the Chinese, which had found some British citizens guilty of serious crimes in the past. Britain also received any rights that other countries may have been enjoying in China at that time as well. Not much time passed before the Second Opium War began, lasting from 1856 to 1860. This time France joined Britain in the attack, and victory resulted in the following concession from China. Beijing promised to provide residences for foreign envoys, several additional ports opened to Western trade and residence, foreign travel was permitted into interior China, missionaries were granted freedom of movement throughout the country, and opium was finally legalized. This was the beginning of the end for 2 millennia-old imperial China. China descended into a semi-colonial status with increasing inner turmoil, famines, and wars, while multiple foreign countries claimed parts of China and established spheres of influence including England, France, Japan, Russia, and other powers. Foreign demands and indemnities increased with each conflict, ostensibly resulting in expansion of foreign participation in China's political and economic life at the same time that alien presence greatly expanded along the coast. The Chinese witnessing this observed that the country was being sliced up like a melon. One of those ensuing inner struggles that helped weaken the Qing dynasty was the largest civil war in Chinese history, the Taiping Rebellion lasting from 1850 to 1864. An uprising led by Han Shouquan grew from southern China, eventually leading to the establishment of the Heavenly Kingdom, which came to control 30 million people. He claimed to be the brother of Jesus Christ and sought to convert the Han people to his God-worshipping society, which shared many similarities with Mormonism. While galvanizing his followers with this religion, he sought to overthrow the Qing dynasty and transform the mechanisms of the state, ultimately to revolutionize the social order. After 14 years of fighting, the rebellion was defeated, after somewhere between 20 to 30 million people, perhaps many more, died. Some scholars claim that about 5 to 10% of China's population died off at that time. Seeing themselves dying off in large numbers due to wars, famines, as well as the deterioration of the empire's ability to function, many decided that they must leave China. They hired themselves out as indentured servants, thereby entering into the coolie trade, which developed as African slave trade began to fade, due to increasing bans from various governments. They were shipped off to many different locations across North and South America, Southwest Asia, and Oceania. Anglophone capitalists linked the opium trade to the trade in coolie labor, describing them together as poison and pigs. Many Chinese were hopeful of finding fortune in their new worlds, but a great many were met with difficult working conditions and severe humiliation, resulting in high suicide rates.